Welcome to the Headley Highlight Show's Headley Headspace. And this Headspace is called the Coalition of the Foolish, or as my mum called them, the Coalition of the Stupid. The joint political declaration for boots on the ground with Ukraine, signed by Starmer, Merz and Macron, the Three Stooges, the Coalition of the Foolish. So before I jump into my Headspace, which is called the Coalition of the Foolish, the joint declaration signed by Merz, Macron and Starmer, the Three Stooges, the Coalition of the Foolish, I want to say a huge gratitude, thank you to everyone who listens to my show, who likes, comments and shares. And do not forget, on my YouTube channel, DeniseHeadley.com, click the bell notification and select all, so that when I do my uploads, you'll get them all. Don't forget to donate as well. I'm very partial to a bit of Bitcoin or 3 wings and chips and a Miranda. So let's jump straight into this Headspace, which is called the Coalition of the Foolish. The joint political declaration by Merz, Macron and Starmer, the Three Stooges, is a coalition of absolute foolishness. And shall I explain why I think it's that way? Firstly, let's lay down a couple of facts about the Ukraine conflict that Europe is continuing to push forward for. Don't forget that Boris Johnson was dispatched and promised Zelensky so many things, along with his own personal payday, if he continued the war and did not agree to the first peace plan, Istanbul 1. If you're fresh to my channel, welcome. My position is as follows. This is a self-inflicted wound by Europe by encroaching on Russia's security red lines. Russia has been prosecuting the special military operation and continues to do so successfully. And Russia militarily will decide this war, irrespective of the posturing and conversations that happen on your For You page on CBMNS, MSN, BBC or Al Jazeera. So why did I name the Three Stooges the Coalition of the Foolish? Primarily because of that context, but also because this exercise of constant European posturing has nothing to do with peace and everything to do with the fact that Europe is interested in prolonging the war because their economies are in freefall. Blowing up Nord Stream and getting cheap gas was a self-defeating exercise. So this is what's happened subsequent to that. Starmer, Merz and Macron met on Monday and agreed a press statement which basically said they are planning to deploy troops to Ukraine after a peace deal has been agreed. So when Mr. Starmer made his announcement, bear in mind, nothing has gone to Parliament. Your local MP has had no conversation about whether or not any of his constituents want to have their heads blown off in Kaplants. And yet our Prime Minister was making announcements.
Declaration of intent on the deployment of forces to Ukraine in the event of a peace deal. This is a vital part of our ironcast commitment to stand with Ukraine for the long term. It paves the way for the legal framework under which British, French and partner forces could operate on Ukrainian soil, securing Ukraine's skies and seas and regenerating Ukraine's armed forces for the future.
Really, with what parliamentary oversight has this declaration been signed? Really, with what troops are you actually going to be putting on the ground? And with what equipment? And how can you put NATO troops into an active conflict which they're not supposed to be part of? Like I said, the Coalition of the Foolish. The reason that this exercise or that press statement was as hollow as Keir Starmer's policy agenda and his grip over his own cabinet and political direction in this country, he's a marionette, is because it fundamentally ignores a number of things. Enter stage left, Nigel Farage. And I know you might be thinking, Denise, why are you making reference to Mr. Farage? Well, a number of things can be present at the same time. And one of them is that on this occasion, he's making perfect sense about the military.
Boots on the ground, with kit. What boots? What kit? I mean, we might be able to go for 6 or 8 weeks, but if you're talking about a modern day reincarnation of the British army of the Rhine, forget it. We are in no position to do it. And despite all the promises that have been made on defence spending, absolutely none of them have happened so far, and there's no particular indication that they will.
So clearly there hasn't been significant thought given to this exercise. And Parliament at the time that the statement was made hadn't been told anything. Here's Mr. Starmer again.
Side with our European and American allies and President Zelensky at the Coalition of the Willing meeting in Paris. Mr. Speaker,
Coalition of the foolish, if you ask me.
we made real progress on security guarantees, which are vital for securing a just and lasting peace.
The UK and the Europe are not in a position to offer any security guarantees because their ally and partner, America, won't offer any security guarantees. And Europe is not at the table in the conversation anyway about the ceasefire. It's America and Russia having that conversation. Where is Europe? Nowhere to be found. You know why? Because the US administration despise the Europeans.
Along with President Macron and President Zelensky, we agreed a declaration of intent on the deployment of forces in the event of a peace deal.
President Zelensky is an illegitimate leader. He hasn't held elections for over 2 years. His successor has already been organised by MI6. That's the new person that you see in shaking hands recently. So the idea that President Zelensky is a cogent and credible leader, that in itself lends you to the agreement of my overall headspace, which is this is the coalition of the foolish.
Mr. Speaker, we will set out the details in a statement at the earliest opportunity.
So no statement was made, just a political declaration to commit troops, presumably a range of MPs' constituents, to an exercise of futility, because let's face it, Russia is winning this war and it's going to be won militarily.
I will keep the House updated as the situation develops, and were troops to be deployed under the declaration signed, I would put that matter to the House for a vote.
So he's committing Parliament to a course of action that they don't even have the opportunity to discuss in advance. Retrospective politics, playing with children's lives. Well, not children's lives, but young people's lives, because those are the people who are going to go to war. It's not going to be Keir Starmer's kids. Hell no.
The last few days have seen significant international events. The US operation in Venezuela, threats towards Greenland, and an agreement to put British troops on the ground in Ukraine. So it is frankly astonishing that the Prime Minister is not making a full statement to Parliament today. No Prime Minister, Labour or Conservative, has failed to make a statement to the House in person after committing to the deployment of British troops. His comments about making a statement in due course, quite frankly, are not good enough. It shows a fundamental lack of respect for all of us here and the people we represent. Mr. Speaker, the US is Britain's closest military ally. However, we are clear that the sovereignty of Greenland is sacrosanct. So can the...
That's another interesting exercise. But we're not going to go there yet, because we're still focusing on the question of the coalition of the foolish. What's clear is that the two opposition leaders, whether you like them or not, Kemi Badenoch and Nigel Farage, both are demanding a number of things. One, that Parliament should be kept informed, and two, a real realization that militarily we're not in a position to do a great deal. So therefore, what is the point of assigning our troops in this country to an exercise whereby they are likely to face basically being unalived because they'll be treated as combatants? The whole premise of the political agreement for peacekeeping troops, in my opinion, not only is folly, but it's based on a European fantasy of how the world is based on their own exceptionalism and their own desire to have a view of the facts which don't coincide with most people's reality as conveyed through their retinas, corneas and eyes. Europe is fractured, including the UK, on the issue of the Ukraine. And they realise that NATO is in significant jeopardy because Mr. Trump has ambitions of a land grab in Greenland, which is, let's face it, a European land border and state. And he doesn't seem to care anymore about the rules-based order. So the coalition of the foolish are working with an ally who is now an adversary. And that same superpower ally is supposed to give security guarantees for the security infrastructure that it subsidizes, that it no longer wants to do that exercise for. So how can it be an exercise of good political sense to say we're going to commit to troops and boots on the ground when the superpower who's going to underwrite that has basically said, our survey said no. Another example, in my opinion, of why Keir Starmer, Macron and Merz are part of the coalition of the foolish is because by continuing to fund the Ukraine, they're prolonging the war. And the recent drone attacks on Mr. Putin's residence were organized, according to, I think it was the New York Times, and supported by the CIA. You know, President Trump's basically said we've got our own people there. So think about that as an exercise. They are prosecuting the war and also fighting the war. Does that even make sense? So where does the ceasefire and the peace plan come with that particular dance between Russia and America? Add into that the coalition of the foolish. They're like gnats buzzing around. You need to use a really strong spray, but it's just not really hitting them significantly enough to remove them from your eye line. Or should I say your hand wafting line. Another reason that the coalition of the foolish will have no success is because it can't be enforced. Those countries don't have the troops, and they certainly don't have the munitions, and they don't have the local political will in amongst their citizenry for this exercise to continue. This is an elite, what I would call these national oligarchic groups that operate across the whole of the Europe and elsewhere. This is their issue. This isn't anything to do with the ordinary citizens of Europe. How many of them want to see their hard-earned taxes being poured into a futile, pointless exercise in the Ukraine? The coalition of the willing can't realistically enforce anything. Multinational partner forces, Germany, who noticeably didn't agree to any troops, said they're going to put troops in Poland. What's the point of that? These are posturings once again. The whole thing is symbolic and shambolic. The coalition forces lack the logistics, the air defense, and the capability to make any of this even credible. It just shows the weakness and the perforation of the European project at its core. Let's not forget what Meloni said in Italy. None of our troops are going there. Sorry, we're not doing that. Thank you and good night with that one. The truth is that NATO has been fighting Russia, and they have been losing. That's the reality. Otherwise, all you have to look at is the battle line, and it keeps going more and more forward. This notion that Russia wants to go into other parts of Europe, frankly, I think that's another European fantasy. The reality is no real military intervention that's currently being deployed is going to make any significant changes to the outcome of this war. The US is not going to put troops on the ground because this is counterproductive, and their real eye is on China. And the view of Europe is to keep the war going without decisive results until they get a change of administration in America. Someone more pro-European. Maybe that's why Mr. Obama is constantly visiting 10 Downing Street. So it's my opinion that the coalition of the foolish is just that, a collection of bumpkins who are completely out of touch with their local political policy agenda as per their citizenry would articulate. Each one of them has less than, I think it's like 15% ratings in terms of popularity locally across the board. They don't represent their citizens. They represent vested interests. And that's the reason why they're pursuing things in the way that they're pursuing things. There's no military capability for any significant peacekeeping troops after a peace that you're not even involved in. I mean, the peacekeeping exercise hasn't even fully been written. There is no peace ceasefire. The exercise is still in being constructed. So how can you commit to something that hasn't even been put down in paper? Do you see what I'm saying about the coalition of the foolish? And the European powers are not even at the table in the negotiation. So how can you talk about your involvement in a process that you're not even part of? Once again, leading us to the same conclusion, it's the coalition of the foolish. And then today, just because of the ramping up of attacks on Russian targets and the seizing of their oil tankers, Russia deployed the Oreshnik. Yeah, their hypersonic ballistic weapon. And Europe has no counter to the Oreshnik. And this is the second time Putin had to draw for the Oreshnik card. This other fantasy that Mr. Putin is going to allow Europeans to and the Americas to continually encroach on his security red lines, frankly, it's bunkum. And Mr. Putin is not a dictator. He has to answer to the Duma. You know, the elected representatives of his country. He has to account for that. And not how many of his citizens have lost their lives. So he can't just, this notion that somehow he acts in a solitary way, that's also another Western fantasy. So I don't know what your thoughts are, but for me, this is another example of European exceptionalism, hubris, and a fantasy-based political agenda that has no basis in reality and is completely disconnected from the citizenry of those countries. What do you think? That's my 3 pence, 4 pence, plus an additional 2 cities. Why not jump up on the podium and give me yours? Thank you for your listening ears. I had to just bring that one in because honestly, it was just way too important for me to leave it. And I didn't even go on about the money that's been spent on this exercise. And now, did you notice that there are concerns about the money usage in Ukraine? I think the head of staff of Mr. Zelensky was recently arrested because there are concerns about where the money's gone. There's no auditing. These people are just getting money, and the level of kickbacks, I imagine, is phenomenal. But that's all, and that's all part of this whole exercise. Give me your thoughts, your 2 pence, your 3 cities, and your declining dollar price. Don't forget to jump up in the comments, like, share at DeniseHeadley.com, and leave a donation. I'm partial to 3 wings and chips and a bit of Bitcoin, along with a Miranda. See you next week, and cut!